And for more on this, CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us from the Pentagon. Charlie, very good to see you. Very different kind of tone and tenor from their last meeting in the Oval Office back in February. What was your biggest takeaway from this Zelenskyy meeting?
Yeah, sorry, I just had to turn you up. Get me a little bit soft. One of the big takeaways, first of all, as you said, the tone and tenor of this, and this is pregame, right? Just to look at the behavior of the gentleman, the body language of the two of them before these very serious, very grave discussions are to begin. But it struck me, and it certainly struck a lot of people in this building, when President Trump has said he's open to providing intense security guarantees, and he would not rule out sending U.S. forces as peacekeepers. The devil will be in the detail there, because, you know, you can have U.S. forces in the region as a sort of contingency force, and the U.S. military is probably the best in the world when it comes to air defenses, and you don't have to be on the ground necessarily for that. You saw it happened with Israel and Iran. So that, to me, were the two sort of standout things. But it's calling together some of these European leaders. It just sort of underlines the seriousness of what's happening here. They would tell you that they've come here in order to support President Zelenskyy, but really this is calling in the big guns, including NATO Secretary General. So it will be telling to see, especially when it comes to conceding some of that territory that President Zelenskyy said he will not do. That is where President Putin said that he wants to have that territory. That is going to be a hard hurdle to get around in the negotiations that are to come. And also the fact when President Trump said that he would be speaking to President Putin directly after these meetings today and try to get this trilateral summit arranged.
Of course, this is all unfolding so quickly. When the president went into the summit with Putin on just Friday, he said he wanted to see a ceasefire rapidly. Of course, that is no longer the focus, as Trump is saying he is now looking for a peace agreement to end the war outright. What does that change signal to you?
Yeah, so, you know, it was interesting because Trump was very clear about what he wanted was a ceasefire. And, of course, a ceasefire, as it denotes, is a sort of temporary thing. However, he changed his tone over the weekend. And you know, I wasn't in the room with President Trump and President Putin in Alaska, but I have to think that there was something that President Putin said about him in order to influence him, say, look, we shouldn't be going for a ceasefire. We should actually be going to a peace negotiation. So obviously everybody wants this war to end, but it might be a situation where President Putin put something to President Trump. He said, I simply won't accept a ceasefire. But again, I have to drill down on the fact that the European leaders who have been called to the White House, you know, this isn't like a traditional NATO summit that you would see in Brussels, right, which would be taken care of by defense ministers. These are European leaders, and those European leaders, if there's going to be a security guarantee, they will be the main guarantors of that. And again, we've learned that the president has not ruled out sending U.S. forces as peacekeepers. We don't know whether that's actually on the ground, U.S. boots on the ground, but or, you know, as a sort of quick reaction force nearby. So all of these things are at play. A lot of this is a show of support and unity. You know, you'll have the team photo where you've got the heads of state, President Zelenskyy there, President Trump there as well. But I think there are expectations that real progress might be made this afternoon.
Yeah, if they're sending a message, it's certainly being received. A lot has been made of Putin's motivations in all of this. Some experts saying that he wants to drag the war out for as long as possible because Russia would ultimately have the upper hand. What is your sense on this?
You know, Nancy, I've been covering this since 2014, even before that. You know, when the initial Russian incursion was made in the Donbass region, and first it was by Russian separatists. That's when Russia took over Crimea without a shot being fired. But there was an incursion into the Donbass region. There was an agreement that was hammered out, the Minsk agreement that was handed out in order to stop the fighting between the Ukrainians and the Russians. And at that time, Ukraine didn't have anywhere near the resources it has now. Nobody held to that agreement. In fact, 18,000 people were killed over the course of between 2014 and 2022. So we already have sort of proof of whether or not President Putin will stick to any agreements. I think it's also worth adding here that if he were to take over this territory, which he doesn't, the territory that he's claiming, the Russians haven't taken over. He's actually asking for more territory than the Russians have gained. You got to think that's going to be a militarized zone, right? So that, when you think of the geography and think of essentially putting up a new heavily reinforced Russian front line, and then the idea of an international peacekeeping force that might include the United States. I mean, that really would be a tinderbox. It would be great if it brings an end to the fighting there. But again, the devil will be in the detail. And there's a lot of trust. And President Putin has shown time and again he can drag things out as long as he wants to. And even now, he's been losing hundreds of thousands of casualties. But Russia is a vastly resourced military industrial base, and they can continue fighting. They've got help from the North Koreans. They're producing more drones and missiles every day. And as we've seen, they may be talking peace behind closed doors in places like Alaska and in the White House. But the fighting is raging, not just on the front lines, but taking pot shots at places like Kharkiv, as Holly Williams has reported. You know, there's no let up. There's not even like a pause. There's not even sort of a goodwill gesture to suggest that Russia's saying, you know, maybe we should just turn down the intensity a bit while we hammer out these negotiations. I mean, Putin's playing his cards.
No, he certainly is. And it's we know that you will be watching and reporting on the very latest. Always a pleasure to be able to talk with you. Charlie D'Agata, thank you.
Thank you.